Today, we're joined by a sailor who's left a tremendous mark on the H class. He won a junior championship in 1982, and just 5 years later, won his first senior class championship. Across the following 3 decades, he sailed in 27 H class nationals, a number eclipsed only by three other sailors. He's won a record 7 times, finished in the top three 13 times, and pretty much by any statistical measure is the most accomplished H12 racer of all time. He's dedicated much of his life to coaching sailing and continues to foster our class, even though we don't see him on the starting line anymore. I'm very happy to have Rob Hurd here to chat with us. Thank you for being here, and on behalf of the H class, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me back. It has been way too long. So I'm glad to sort of reconnect with everybody and see a lot of familiar faces, which is great.
That's great. So diving right in, I'd love to hear about your family's history with 12s. Was there a wooden boat before Wendy? Is there a long line of herds sailing E-boats and S-boats out of Quissit?
Yeah, no, it would be great if that's where the story started, but the story sort of had really humble beginnings. My dad, I don't know why, saw the Dotish ad that Bill Harding had put out in 1973 and went over to Mattapoisett to Edie and Duff and bought the first one, hull number 001, and sailed it across from Mattapoisett over to Quissit, put it on a mooring, put me in sailing lessons, and that was sort of the start. I was, I think, 8 years old at that point. The Quissit fleet let my parents race in the fleet, but not for any silverware. So they weren't sure about what these fiberglass boats were going to do. And so I credit my parents for being as mediocre sailors for the birth of the class. Because if they had been any good, the wood class would have said, no, you can't join us. And the H class may have never come off the ground. But because they were mediocre, they didn't deem the fiberglass boats a threat. And the next year they allowed the fiberglass boats in, and that's when the class sort of formed. As a junior sailor in Quissit, you started off sailing prams and not opties, but like prams. And I still have the broken wooden mast somewhere in my house from early days where the mast was basically a closet rod, and when it broke, you took it off, you put two more screws in, and put a new one in, and sent the kids back out. And then the only boats you really raced, once you got out of the pram was the Herreshoff. So back in those days, a vibrant junior fleet of probably 10 or 12 boats on a Friday morning, in the Quissit fleet, and then the Wednesday Saturday series of Quissit was still pretty big too. Sometimes 15. I remember it's 15, 20 boats. Maybe it was more, maybe it was less. I don't know. But I always remember it being a big group. And I remember racing with my parents, when I was little. It was the third person on board. I'm not sure what I did that much. I remember my parents yelling at each other a lot. As I think many married couples who race do. Again, I remember them being fairly mediocre in what they did. But that was sort of the start. And, I sort of, it was the only thing to sail. So you sailed it and you learned to sail it well. I remember, I think the first time I sailed in the junior series at the yacht club, you were allowed to have an adult as a crew, but the adult couldn't touch the helm ever unless it was like an emergency. And it probably a good rule when you're talking about at that point, what is now a $36,000-$40,000 boat, tossing it off to a bunch of 10 and 11-year-olds really doesn't make, without any adult supervision, is a hefty bet by a parent. So I remember racing with my dad or racing with my mom, in the series, and not knowing any rules, but did know how to make the boat go fast. And I learned, as most of us do, by making mistakes and learning from those mistakes and trying not to make them again. I lost track of the number of races and things I got thrown out of for a protest here or there that I didn't really know the rules, which I find ironic now because I give lectures on the rules. So I do know the rules really well now, but as a 10 and 12, 13-year-old kid, I really don't think I really did. But at some point, my parents trusted me enough to race the boat myself. And so I got sent out and and had a litany of friends growing up in Quissit, who were in my sailing class, who crewed for me. People like Sage Wheeler and Putney Clues come to mind as the two who I think raced with me the most. And it was always great. I mean, it was just a great way to spend, time as a kid, back in the late 70s, early 80s, on the water as well.
So, you mentioned that your parents were a bit mediocre as far as their finishing in the races. Did you have any sort of mentor that taught you about how to make a 12 go fast specifically, or were you taking some of the stuff that you were learning at sailing school? What do you credit there to you figuring it out?
Yeah, I mean, I think like many of us growing up, there was always that sailing instructor that struck a nerve, a positive nerve, and pushed you in the right direction. For me, it was Martha Hanscom. She came over from, I want to say Minot is where she was. So she was an outside instructor, and and bred some fresh life into what we were doing in the program. And I was, there was a lot of great, local kids who worked there too, but I just remember her being the one who sort of at least sparked an interest in my racing ability, and sort of, helped me get to the next level. But a lot of it was trial and error, just going out and sailing. Um, I think the thing I really like about the H class is there's not a lot of lines to tweak. It's not like a 470 or an Etchells or some of the boats a lot of other classes have, where you've got a lot of different lines to pull, and if you get the sail shape correct, you get a lot of speed out of it. It's a lot of just set it and go. And so it's a lot of feel on the tiller, and sort of sense, and getting used to the how the boat and the waves and how your body is telling you the boat and the waves are behaving, vis-a-vis the wind to make the boat power forward. So, and that's just practice. That is just practice. That is going out and racing every Friday morning in the junior series. That's racing every Wednesday and Saturday afternoon in the senior series. That's getting your stern handed to you, time in and time again, by people like Jen Chalmers and David Burt, and it's working hard to get a good technique to start the boat. It's understanding the local conditions. At least that was the initial part. Sailing in Quissit, you learn the local conditions. We start off at our starting buoy, and I'm sure at Buzzards and at Edgartown and Shelter Island, everybody's got the same sort of place that you always start the races. And then in a southwest breeze, the course is usually a J, D, H, and it's a port or starboard triangle, and start and finish the middle. And you start, and you first one to the shore gets the lift off against it, and that then brings you to the mark on a good tack. And so if you can figure a way of getting there first and figuring out that, once you figure out what the strategy is at the place, then it's a question of how you then execute that strategy the best you could. But it was just practice. It was just a lot of sailing in boats. And then it wasn't just racing, it was just sailing the boat. And that's the great thing about the Herreshoff, is just going out, sailing it, taking it out, driving it, going around, all kinds of weather, things like that. And you just get a sense of how you and your boat sort of mesh. And I think that was really instrumental in it, because again, it's not a lot of tweaking you can do. You pull the gaff up, you get the sail really flat, and go. And I was winning races with the sails I got from as graduation present from high school in 1983. I still have that. That is still the main set of sails for Wendy, is that 1983 set of sails.
I love that. And I was expecting that to come up on this call because it is 2025. The class has moved along, and there are a lot of people that buy sales a lot. And I've been excited to hear you talk about that because, I mean, you won a championship with those sales when they were 20 years old, probably, right?
At least.
Yeah.
If I was going to race again, I would have to get a new set of sails. So don't think I'm going to campaign that boat with that old set of sails. They could be moth ridden for all I know. The boat has been in dry dock for a number of years. But yeah, it was just getting a sense of what you feel. And the great thing about those old sails is, as they got baggy, the boat got really fast downwind. And the old spinnaker, same thing, sort of blown out a little bit. You could get a lot of good pockets, but on breezy days, they weren't, it wasn't, you couldn't quite get the flattest read. So what you do with a boat like that that's got a lot of power is you learn how to harness that power and how to, feather the boat, how to sail, so you're not tipped on your ear the most of the time, and how to just drive the boat, well. So it's again, it's just getting out into the breeze and practicing as much as you can.
So, this is talking a lot about junior sailing and what it was like at the beginning as a teenager.
Mhm.
We got a lot of parents, grandparents, in the room today who might have kids who are starting to get interested. And for what it's worth, just to let everybody know, after I think it's been almost 30 years since we changed the rule with the juniors so that the juniors have to be a junior team. We're going to start to allow a junior senior team back into the junior championship this year. They won't be able to win the official award, but in the interest of sort of trying to expand the class a little bit and understanding that a lot of people won't loan their boats to juniors because, like you said, they're pretty expensive pieces of art these days. We're going to start to let seniors crew for juniors again, which is kind of cool. But in that mode, if we're talking about kids and do you have any advice for parents that want their kids to get excited about sailing? I think you already said it as far as just getting them in the boat and getting them sailing, but yeah, any advice for parents with kids that might want to get involved in 12 sailing?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, like as I said, in the 70s and 80s, early 80s, the Herreshoff was the only deal in town. Um, and I remember, like, I was working as a race coach at the highest yacht club in, I think it was 92. Like at the end of the year, we brought in opties to try them out to see if that would be a good fit in our program. And so that's now 32 years ago. Like every program has got a fleet of opties and a fleet of 420s, we at Quistit we went from the Pram, wasn't even an opti, but the Pram to a Javelin. Nobody has javelins. Nobody had javelins even at that point. And Buzzards, it was the Widgeon, and I know you still have a few of them up there at Buzzards,
We
but
finally got rid of them. We had a fleet literally until this year, but
yeah.
we finally got rid of them and we're sailing. I can't remember what we bought, but we bought a fleet of something new.
And the Beetle Cat and the Cape Cod Knockabout and all the old classes have really been run over by the kids boats, the 420 and the Opti. And so if you're a junior sailor, you're not going to sail a Herreshoff, unless your parents have one and they really sort of want to put you out in it. Because for a couple of reasons, and frankly, I'm not sure you should, but you get out of the Opti, which is a double-edged sword. It's great at teaching independence and skills because you're the only one in the boat. You have to figure it out. But a lot of kids want to get out of it quickly because the double-handed part of a 420 is more social and it's a lot more fun. And that's where their friends are. That's where their friends are racing. That's what the regattas are in. Back in the early days, there was no 420 Opti circuit because not everybody had them. And so the regattas you went to were the H class nationals, or if you like my wife grew up in West Dennis, and she remembers sailing the Beetle Cats over to Hyannis to race in the Hyannis regatta because that's where like all the fleets of different Beetle Cats would show up, besides the Telsmatic, which was their big championship. So the kids have a much more social time doing that stuff. And now you're going to ask them, hey, come sail with mom and dad in the Herreshoff on Wednesday night or Saturday and stuff. And they're going to be like, I don't necessarily see the realm. They also, I don't think yet see, and this is always the fun part too. They don't see that as a challenging boat and they look down on the Herreshoff. So they'll like, oh, I can jump into it and I can beat you. And they can't because they try to sail it like a dinghy and it's really not. It's a small keel boat and you have to do different things in there than you would in a 420. So I always enjoy it when they think they can jump into the 420 into the H class and take on some people who've been doing it for a while because it often ends poorly for them. And
Yeah.
then they're like, well, screw it, your boat sucks and I'm not going to do that anymore. And then they go back to their own fleet of boats. And with the explosion of high school sailing and explosion of college sailing, it's sort of the 420 perpetuates their motion forward if that's what they really want to do as much. That said, the pathway now back into something like a Herreshoff, and this is where I think clubs can take advantage of this, is not the 15-year-old kid in your junior program. but is the 23-year-old, 24-year-old kid who has just graduated from college, maybe a college sailor, and can't afford to buy their own boat. And that's the market, I think, to bring people into the fleet. Because as I can look around the room here, and again, I'm 60, and some of you are older than me, because I know you were much older than me when I started racing. You can sail this boat, right up to the end. Chip Whipple was said before, like, he's getting out of the Herreshoff. You don't get out of the Herreshoff until you die, because you can literally sail it until you're 90. So, the fact if somebody wants to come back in, start up at 25, they're not really that far behind the 8 ball. They now need to really figure out how to sail a keel boat, and I think that's the interesting on ramp for a lot of programs, or possible. And now you're getting younger people into your program, into your racing stuff, maybe into your club, and we all know that's the lifeblood of a lot of clubs. You have a lot of junior sailors, you have a lot of families, and then there's a big gap before those people get old enough to have families that come back to the club with their kids, type of thing.
That's
So
great.
yeah, I think what you're doing at the junior championship is great. It never really was, and even its heyday, maybe 10 boats.
Right.
I could think about it. You talking here about racing when you're young, and what was it, 82 that I won the junior nationals?
That's right.
It's been 81. I remember racing over in Mattapoisett. There were three of us, and back in those days, the juniors were on Monday, so the seniors would race Saturday, Sunday, and then like the juniors were left to mop up on Monday. And there were three of us there, and like the other boat like dropped out after the second race. And so Doug Jones and I had to like match race against each other. And Doug knew how to match race and I didn't. And I fouled him like before the start, and like that was the end. And back in those days, you couldn't do a 720 penalty, you had to withdraw. So the race never started. I had to withdraw. He won the regatta because he knew what he was doing, and I still at that point did not know what I was doing. But if there were three boats in the race, he wouldn't have an opportunity to do that. He would have had to actually sail me straight up. So there are those, as you continue to bring things forward, that's a good thing to sort of think about, is how many boats do you really need to make it a fun sort of practice to go. And I think if you get some parents who maybe will bring their 10-year-old or 12-year-old kid, the kid who's maybe getting out of opties or still in opties but not ready for the 420, and can sort of get them excited about sailing that may give a lot of interest, a lot more interest. Whether they stay in the class or not, I'm doubtful, but it could be a fun thing for that time. And then maybe mom and dad switch positions and the kid crews for them and the seniors, and that's a fun weekend.
It's definitely what happened. That's my experience. Although at
Yeah,
this point, that's
you're
still
a
a
prime
while.
example of that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you graduated pretty quickly into sailing, in the senior nationals. And this was still in the early going of the H class, as early as 1972, there was no regatta. There was just a single race over in Beverly. So we're talking about the first 10 years of the class really establishing itself. I'm just wondering, if you have any memories of those early H class championships and what they were like. Were they very competitive? Were they not very competitive? What was the vibe like?
Well, I don't really recall. I mean, I recall racing a couple times with my parents in those, and that was probably back in the mid 70s, but I don't remember much, about that, again, except we were mediocre. I'll have to go back and look at some of those early results you've posted, and sort of see. I don't know when the first time my parents said, "You take the boat and you do it," was. But I do know they were pretty competitive, and it was regularly, I remember, again, I believe there were like 25, 30 boats out there, so it always seemed like a stacked group. And it was always the same people. I mean, you had the David Burts and the Janet Chalmers of, and then the Fisher brothers. I know Jay's on the call, as well. And I remember I remember going to Edgartown in 83. And we all got there. It might have been Edgartown's first year hosting. And we got there and it blew like stink. And they for the northeast. And I see Claire looking at me, and you can't go out and race off of Katama in the northeast breeze with the waves coming in. It just wasn't safe. So they sent us all down to Katama Bay. and they raced us across the bay. It was like up and down 4 times was the race course. And the fishers were coming downwind. We swamped our boat. I don't know how you swamp a dotish, but we swamped it. That's how windy it was. And we were reefed. But the fishers broke their mast, like clean off, snapped it. And I think it was a barred boat at that point too. That's how windy it was. It was wild. And I just remember that being like a fun, it was almost like, NASCAR derby racing, because it was like just survival. Like
Yeah.
I don't couldn't even tell you how we did. I just know we survived. And we finished all the races. And if Jay broke his mask, we must have beat him in that one as well.
Uh,
But you're right there to the end, like, no guts, no glory. Probably because they were putting their spinnaker up when nobody else was. But it was wild. And just the camaraderie afterwards. You come back to the shore and everybody's talking. That's the great thing about sailing, is you get everybody together and start doing the hand dance and why were you here and what were you doing there, and I think that's always been a great part of the class, is this sharing of information afterwards, and the camaraderie. I mean, look, you got 41 people on a random Tuesday night to come out and listen to me talk.
So
Uh,
over the
yeah,
years, over 3 decades, you must have seen the class evolve over time. You competed against a lot of the legends of the class, Danny Schley and Doug Cooper in the 80s,
yeah.
Joey Hetzek and Bill Ware in the 90s, Warren Vos and David Korb in the 2000s. And you performed well across those eras. I'm wondering, when you look back, were any of your 7 wins, did any of them, do any of them mean more to you than any of the others, or any of them stick out to you?
Yeah, so that's like asking a parent which of your children is the most important to you. And the answer to that question is clearly the one that's going to take care of you in the old age. But yeah, I think two sort of stick out to me, or maybe three. The first one was 87, the year we knocked off 3-time champion Danny Schley. And he was leading going to the last race, and we sort of pulled a rabbit out of our hat in a dying northwest breeze, at Quissit. And that's what I sort of knew, like, oh crap, I've arrived. Like he's really good. And so was Doug Cooper, and so was Bill Ware, and so was Joey Headsick. And there was a whole bunch of people there, and I beat them. And in 87, I'm 22. I'm just graduating. I just graduated from college. And so that was sort of like, ooh, that was like pretty cool. And I think it meant a lot. It meant a lot to me, because of who I beat. You get to be the best by beating the best, and getting a chance to sail against Danny, and having that opportunity, to beat him was pretty good. Um, the the second one was 93 over in Edgartown. And many of you guys know, and maybe not all of them, but that's the year my brother passed away in his boating accident off of the vineyard. And so that was, I think, sort of in the back of my mind, as we sailed through, those waters over to there as well. And it was interesting. I distinctly remember we sailed 3 bases on Saturday. It was not blowing like stinky. We were outside. And then on Sunday, the breeze went, and we had a dying northeasterly out in the bay there. And we all got set. And I don't know who was running the race committee, what they were thinking, but the gun went off, and like nobody crossed the line because there was no wind. And we're sitting there and we're sort of bobbing up and down. And Danny tacks, he's down by the pin, and he tacks onto port, and he just port tacks the fleet in this dying northeast wind. I'm like, oh crap, he's gonna, because we were like, all jumbled together, we're gonna, mix it up. And so I remember, thinking, oh crap, that's too bad. And I'm looking around, and I turned to my crew, Putney Clues, at the time, and I'm like, Putney, get the spinnaker out. She's like, what? I go, just get the spinnaker out, get it ready to go. She's like, why? I go, just do it. Like, we're trying to be really quiet because all these boats around, but nobody's going anywhere. We're bobbing around. And I've looked over my shoulder, and on the containment, on the a choppy shore, the flags have just come out from the southwest, and they are rocking. And the breeze hits us first, and we pop our spinnaker. Now all 35 boats are going dead downwind towards the upwind mark, all lined up. And we are in a great position because we are what's going to be inside, basically inside. And right next to us is Claire, and right inside of us is Doug Jones. And the blanket of the boats coming in is so immense that Doug has no air. He can't get his boat to head down to get around the mark. He actually misses the mark. He would have been leading, but he misses the mark because he couldn't get any flow over his rudder to get the boat going. And Claire and I round 1, 2, I forget who was first. I think Claire ended up actually winning that race, but I came in second. And Dandy, because he went all the way down on the port side, was now on the outside of a 35 boat pinwheel. And so he didn't win. And then the race, that win like came in and then it disappeared. And they called it after that one race.
Your memory is pretty incredible because I'm looking at the stand, I'm looking, and that's exactly what happened. Claire got first and you got second, and Danny and Doug were deep in that race. It's cool
and
how
so
that happens. The memory, you can race 1,000 races and some of them really stick with you.
yeah, well, I feel like my brother gave me a little push maybe, and got me around the course the way it needed to be. So that one I think always was special as well. And then the last one, I think was the last one I won, and I do not remember the year, but it was at Buzzards. And I raced with Mike Callahan the first day. And we did pretty well. We were right in the mix. And my wife, he couldn't race second day. My wife came in and raced the second day, and we had 2 races, and we went out and we had like a 17. And like that just had popped us out of like contention right off the bat. And now she's freaking out. She's like, I'm going to get blamed for the boat not performing the way it is. And I'm like, it's still another race. Let's see what happens. So we get out and we're going the downwind leg, and Flips Hallowell is like way out in front, and he's going to round and he's going to win the regatta. And he snaps his gaff. And all of a sudden, everybody behind him is like, oh, God, we have a horse race. And he gets around the leeward mark first, but he's got nothing upwind. He can't get the boat to point. His gaff is hanging off the side, and it's a wounded duck. And David Korb, myself, Jay could have been in that group. There was 3 or 4 of us around it, and it was like, now it's a horse race to the finish. And we've all been in places where we should have won and we didn't win, and we places we didn't win and we should have won. Phil sort of probably won that regatta. But I liked that one a lot because it made my marriage really work, because now my wife doesn't think she would be the reason that we had that. And she's still like the best crew I have. She's one of the reasons we haven't really raced in a whole lot of years, because she's so busy. I can't get her away to crew for me, and I don't trust anybody else at this point.
That's a
So
great story.
yeah,
Okay, so you're a coach and
yeah.
you've done a lot of years coaching in all sorts of different boats at all sorts of different levels. Um, if you were coaching a Herreshoff racer looking to improve their scores over the course of just a summer, like if we're looking at this summer, how would
Yeah.
you suggest they go about it from sort of a campaign perspective, right? If the summer is their canvas to try to improve themselves, what are the most common mistakes that is the lowest hanging fruit for people to grab to improve their scores? And then also specifically, if you're building towards the championship, what can you do to try to improve your score in the championship the most?
Yeah. So it's the most of it is time in the boat, sailing the boat, getting the feel of the boat. How does your boat feel vis-a-vis you? What's the boat telling you when you hit the waves, when you're going through the waves? Just how are you getting that tiller time? So that's the most important thing. Getting out, racing every race your yacht club has. Being able to do that is I think is the key starting point. Um, read the tuning guide that George Moffett wrote about how to rig the boat, how to get the wrinkles out of the sails, how to make them make the sails look really tight, because that's going to be your engine, that's going to drive the boat as much as possible. Where to set the boom, those sort of things. Um, get a crew and work on your spinnaker stuff. Like I said, my wife is great with the spinnaker, and she can have it up within seconds of rounding the windward mark and flying, and not wrapped and not twisted, and catching full and getting us going where we need to go. She's great at jiving it, and getting it, doing. So there's a good, symbiotic relationship we have there. And I've raced with other crews who've been equally as good. And my secret, when I was younger, is I would go find somebody in the junior fleet, um, and just train them the way I wanted to do it. And so that meant the first year was going to be rough because they weren't going to be good, and I had to be patient. And I had to sort of take a step back and maybe my expectations. But I knew that if I got this person to where they needed to be, then we would be really good as a team. And so it would be maybe some days just going out and setting sprinters, and taking them down and driving them and working on that part as well. Getting used to hiking the jib and getting the slot opened, so we can be there. Getting good use of communication with your crew. When I sail with Mike Callahan, I was never allowed to do anything but watch the front of the sails. And this is a frustration I have working with high school sailors, both at Tabor for 35 years and now over at Cape Cod Academy. Most of the skippers who are that age have their heads just all over the place, just looking around it. Every time they move their head, their boat bears off and they don't get the same pointing out. When I sail with Mike, I was only allowed to look at the telltales on the jib for the first 5 minutes. That was the only place I was allowed to look. And my watch would go off, and then it would go another 5 minutes, and that would be my clue that I could actually look around. And so we got really good at, we'd be off the line, like, Mike, I feel good. Like, I like to start at the pin. I like to start at the pin and drive and then get a chance to tack out. But I'd be like, Mike, can I tack? And he's like, no. He's like, don't even look, just keep driving. He'd be like, you got a boat on your hip, and we were talking about sail numbers too, because we would know, where David Burt was. We would know where Danny Schley was. We would know where Bill Ware was, and we would know like how they like to drive the boats and where they would be, and and be like, okay, well, you can't tack now, but keep driving like this for another 30 seconds. Let's take a look. And there's like, okay, where's tacked? That's opened up a room. Now Bert's going to go. Okay. And you got one boat holding you, and they're looking around, and they're going to go soon. When do you want to go? I said, I want to go as soon as they go. Can I? If I do that, am I going to be okay? Yes. And you'd be like, okay, all right, their crew's getting ready. 3, 2, 1, we can go. And then boom, they would go, boom, we would go, and we'd have it there. So I had a good tactician, but I had to trust that person to tell me what I wanted to see, so I didn't have to look around. And that way I could drive the boat and drive it fast. And especially off the starting line, I get clean air, you get out in front, you get your sails full, and I'm just going to drive the boat. And that's, I think, where a lot of people struggle. They get a poor start, either because they haven't got themselves up on the line, or they don't drive the boat well in the first 5 minutes. And now they're fighting through the pack. And the secret to good sailing in a Herreshoff, if you can get out in front with clean air, you have a great chance of finishing in the top 3 in whatever fleet you're in. It just the boat moves well when it's got air in its sails and when it's moving. And so, if you don't do that, and you don't have somebody you trust, now you're coming across on port tack, and all of a sudden this is starboard tacker there, and you have to tack quickly, and now that boat rolls you, and next thing you know, you're behind that boat. As opposed to, oh, I see a starboard tacker coming at me, I could duck that boat, and not a quick duck, but like a gradual duck. Let the sail out, let the boat breathe, let the boat speed up around the transom, pull your sails back in, keep moving, get back to the starboard advantage side, but drive the boat. Herreshoffs tack so slowly, and if you don't have to tack a lot, then you're not gonna go slow. You're gonna go fast, and that's, I think, that a key thing. I recall a race at, it wasn't the Nationals, but it was the Edgartown Regatta. Here's another thing you can do too. Like, we regularly used to go out to the Edgartown Regatta, one of the best Herreshoff regattas in the world, because, and Claire, correct me if I've changed it, but as I remember it, 6 races over 3 days, so 2 a day, and the first race starts at 1. So it's not like it's not like the juniors, you get up early and you got to go like out and wait, and you're out there all day. And not does it start at 1, but the class likes to be at the bar by 5. So it's a tight window to get 2 races in. And But the key is all the races count. There's no throwouts. And I sort of like that because it allows for not longevity, but it's what I'm thinking of, consistency to play out for their winner. And so, we've had some great regattas out there where we just, get a chance to sail with some different people in a different place. And it's fun. And a couple of years we've borrowed boats. We've just gone out there and somebody's lent us their boat. And I'd like to think my reputation was enough to, score me a good boat. But I will recall one regatta where we were doing well the first day, and we did well in the first race of the second day, and we came in, we were finishing up, and we've been sailing like shorter courses, but the second race of the second day, before it starts, I look up and the gaff is sort of hanging off to the side because of the prongs on the gaff. One is broken, and now, sorry, let me break this one. And then it's sort of hanging off the side a little bit. So I'm like, oh crap. So we lower the boat down and I take a look at it. And of course, it's a barred boat, so I don't have it's not my toolkit on board. I don't even know what I've got on board. But the two pieces sort of fit back together, but now I've got to secure them, and I've got nothing on this barred boat that I can see that I can do. But in my life jacket from coaching, I've got a roll of electric tape, and I electric taped the crap out of that thing. I mean, just the entire roll. And we put it back up, and we're like, well, let's see, and we tack, and like, seems to be holding. And of course, the race committee gives us an Olympic, which is a triangle windward leeward, windward, the longest course you possibly could have. I'm like, really? Because at this point, the results are, you can either get towed in and take a did not start, in which case you're not going to win the regatta, or give it a shot. So we rolled the dice. And, we get up to the windward mark and we're in third, and the guy who's behind us in the regatta is in second, and Warren Bose is in first, but he didn't sail the first day, so he's not in contention at all. And and my wife actually turns to me, she goes, let's set the spinnaker. I'm like, let's not. Let's just keep sailing and like hope we survive the next 4 legs. So we sail the legs, we go downwind, we do set the spinnaker downwind. She's really good. We pass, I forget who it was. Paul somebody. And we pass them, and we end up gaining a place upwind, and then we got the boat, and we called Vineyard Shipyard, and they met us and they glued it back together overnight, and it held for the next day. I did have to buy the owner, I forget who it was. I did have to buy them a new gaff. So it was a very expensive trophy, which my son then knocked off the cabinet and broke 2 years later. So
What happens?
It's a memory trophy at this point. But it was just a question of just getting out and getting in the boats and getting in a different boat and a different fleet and just practicing and sailing against other people who normally didn't see. It helped because the starting line was different. It was just a different feel. It's a different feel from racing in your local fleet. It's a different feel from going to nationals, where so many of the people are the same, and maybe you only see them once a year, but I know where Janet Chalmers likes to start. I know where I like to start. I know where other people like to be. And you go to the Edgartown fleet, it's like, I don't know, I've never seen these people before in a Herreshoff. So let's roll the dice and sort of see what happens.
That's great help. And man, I very much agree, right? It's the more starts you can get, the better
Yeah.
off you'll be, especially if you can get some of those starts not in your home waters where every single where everybody's going to be starting, and especially starting on a little bit of a larger line with more people, a little more crowded.
Yeah. And let me add to that too, is don't get discouraged. If you're like, okay, I'm going to try to up my game this year, and I'm going to do all these things. And then you call me in October and like, Rob, it didn't help. I still finished fifth in my fleet. Well, don't forget, everybody else is trying to up their game too. And so they're getting better as well. What you're hoping is, are you the kind of person who's normally finishing, I don't know, sixth, fifth in a fleet of 12 boats, and now you're finishing 3, 4 in a fleet of 12 boats. And so you've maybe climbed over a couple of people, and it's not going to be like, boom, all of a sudden I'm going to be at the top. But it's a lot of talk with those people. Like, what were you doing? What were you seeing? Like, and that's the great thing about sailors, as we said before, we love to tell stories and tell, secrets. I remember crossing the finish line with a guy from Edgartown, and like just before we came to the finish line, there was a wave, and I bore off and took we were all going to finish, but I bore off and took the speed. He hit the wave and stopped, and my bow punched out. And he's like, "How did you do that?" And I said, "Well, I could see the wave coming, and I knew I needed to keep my speed up. And you couldn't, because I was below you. You couldn't come down because you were going to hit me, and I was able to drive out underneath you, and that's how I was able to get it." And again, it was a lucky thing. The wave just happened to be there when we got close to the finish line, but it could have been anybody, and it could have been anybody's finish at that point. But it was just, that's one of the things.
Well, you can talk about luck, but you also had the proverbial 10,000 hours in the boat, and you see that wave coming. Maybe it's even unconscious, but you can feel it coming in a way, and you're able to stay down. And we all know momentum and speed is king in the 12. Anything to
Yeah,
keep yourself from stopping.
yeah,
So I think the first thing that I'm sure that a lot of the members would ask, having heard you say all of that, is, okay, cool, but what about my boat? I gotta get the better gear. If I can get my boat tuned better, I can get more boat speed and everything will get fixed here. If you were gonna come back and join us, you said you might buy a new set of sails, but would you approach setting your boat up differently than you had in the past? A lot of one design sailors are really obsessed with their bottoms and making sure there's as little weight up in the rigging as possible, stuff like that. What do you have to say about any of that? How would you go about setting your boat up?
yeah. Well, I mean, Wendy hasn't been on the water for 10, 12 years. She's going in this year. And but I used to sand her myself and paint the bottom every year. And as opposed to letting 12, 15, 140 years of paint, build up every once in a while, I would sand her right down to the fiberglass, so that she could be, it wasn't that much underneath the water, but I did want to make sure that was there. Um, Even with the good paint, it's important to clean the bottom every couple of weeks and just make sure you get the scum off the bottom. So that's a key part. I used to tighten my shrouds super tight so they would really sing. I the funny story. So my second date with the woman who's now my wife, I was gonna take her sailing because I was gonna bring the boat from Sippagan Harbor, where she was, over to Quissit, so then she could go to Edgartown for the nationals. Um, and I got the boat in the water. I rigged the boat up. I put it on the mooring. I came back in. She came over. We came out to the boat 2 hours later, and the entire chain plate had pulled out of the deck. So our second date was me cursing a lot at the boat, taking the boat out of the water, putting on the trailer, driving it to Edie Duff, literally parking it like in their front door on Sunday, so that on Monday when they got in, they could actually fix the boat because it needed to be in Edgartown in 10 days. Um, and But my chain plates were so tight that I think what happened, it hit a wave, and that was the weak part of the boat, was where the chain plate joined the boat, and the stays were so tight. I don't tighten them that much anymore, but I do keep. I like to do that. I like to make sure the forestay is pretty tight as well. What I do, and then I just I've got hoops on the mast, which I think everybody does, but I have track on my boom and my gaff, which is what the original boats had. I think everybody now has the wrap, which is probably better, but I just make sure I on the outhauls for both the boom and the gaff, I just make sure that they come out and they get stretched out as tight as possible for racing, and I make sure I take that off when I'm not racing, so I don't stretch the sails out. Although those 1983 sails are pretty stretched out at this point. Um, and so that's how I would sort of set my boat up and rig it, and I'm really conscious when I'm going upwind. When I get out there, I sort of set the boat, we get out, we go upwind a little bit before the races, and I just make sure I've got no wrinkles along the luff and along the throat as well. Downwind, I'll drop the gaff a little bit and take the wrinkles out of the sail as the boat goes downwind. That's a big sail, even though you got spinnaker up, and it's worth, doing that. And then, of course, the important thing is, if you're rounding the leeward mark and going back upwind, just make sure you take, we take as much as we can on the peak coming back up. And before we round the leeward mark, take the spinnaker down and then go around the wind mark. And then we'll look at it. If it's too high, we can drop it. It's really tough to pull it up higher if you didn't get it up high enough. So we overcompensate there. We don't do a whole lot with the jib downwind unless it's the last downwind leg. I'll drop the jib downwind if it's the last leg and just clear that sail out of the space that I want the spinnaker to breathe in. But otherwise, I try to set things really, really tight, and go from there.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, so you talked a little bit about starts, but I'm curious if you could go through, and this is obviously somewhat relates to the 12, but it's really just about sailing regattas. If you're out there on day one and you're 15 minutes from the first start, how do you approach your race prep and strategy leading up to that start? And then there's already a question in the chat that I can reference right here, which is specifically about the 12. Were there things that you were thinking about the 12 that wouldn't be so true in maybe other one design classes? And I'm thinking specifically because the 12 takes a while to accelerate, and so holding your lane might be a little different. Were there things that you were specifically thinking about with the 12 that is unique to the class?
Yeah, so I want to make sure I've got some speed, and I like to lead back. And I like to start at the pin. Most good race committees will favor the pin 5 degrees, and that's because they want to push the fleet sort of away from the committee boat. At the committee boat, you tend to have a bunch up of for lack of a better term, let's call them first timers. And the first timers may or may not understand that they're right or they're wrong, or how to get away from you if they're wrong. So I try to avoid that sort of pile up area. I also try to avoid the pin because the exact pin because, well, actually, that's not true. One boat's going to win the pin, one boat's going to win the boat. And if there's a big pile up near the pin, I sort of get a sense I don't want to be there because I don't want to roll the dice and say, I'm going to be the one boat who wins the pin. But if I'm in the group that doesn't win the pin, I'm not in a really good place. I want to be. I'd rather be up the line a little bit and maybe not win the pin and be second or third and over that side, as opposed to gambling on where I want to be. So I like to I've timed the line. I've come to the committee boat. I start my watch. I go straight down the line with my sails sort of reaching. And actually, I probably don't even have them reaching. I probably have them, full in, because that's sort of what I'm going to do. I'm not going to spend time pulling my sail and going down the line. I'm just going to go down the line and then come up and not worry about trying to do the sails. And I've got a pretty good line sight of where I think the line is. But that's an interesting thing, and I'll cycle back to that in a second. So I'm going to look at that, and I'm probably going to figure, okay, let's say the line's about a minute, and let's say it's a minute long. So I want to lead back. That means I probably want to be middle of the line about 30 seconds or so, which means I want to be at the pin at about 1 minute. And so I'll be sort of off the pin side a little bit, sort of bobbing around on port tack, sort of looking at what's coming at me and picking my pathway. And then I'll come down the line on port, and I'll sort of tee up whoever that first boat is coming down from the starboard end, because I'm going to tack underneath that boat. And I'm going to come in. I'm going to make sure I complete my tack, which means getting down to a close hauled course. And then maybe I might come up and force them up, as well to control my speed a little bit. But I've got to make sure that as I come in, I get myself fully completed. Oftentimes we're both running down the line, and then I've got to make sure that they don't get underneath me, because they're going to try to come underneath me. And again, a lot of times people don't understand the rules. They get underneath you and they like lure boat up, and they start coming up, and you twist your stern, and now your stern's going to hit their boat. Well, it's going to be the lured boat's foul for altering course, rule 16.1, which nobody understands fully. But I don't even want that. So as they come in, I'm going to try to dip down lower and just keep them on my stern, and try to actually hook them so I get them to windward of me, because as I start, I want to be coming off the line. And even if they're here and I've got my jib out enough, but I've got just my jib out and I'm close enough to them, I will end up pushing myself out and pushing them out the back door. And now that's where I want to be. And there's a great picture. I think it was on the H12's website, but maybe it's not. It's at Edgartown. I know it's at Edgartown because they have cannons. They had cannons back then, and you could see the puff of smoke. So the gun has gone off, and we are three-quarters of a boat out on everybody else. Right? And still at least a boat length below the line. Like the picture is shot from the pin, and you can see straight down the pin to the committee boat. There's us. Everybody else is behind us, but like nobody is on the line. And I trust my crews to put me on the line as good as possible. And the crew's response in that case is, well, we were in front of everybody. I'm like, well, I guess that counts. But I think a lot of times we don't actually know where the line is. And so we tend to hold back a little bit more, being afraid to be over early. And that's okay. But to get your bow out on the start gives your engine a chance to generate and push in. If you get buried at the start, then, up the course, it's going to look like this. And eventually now you're attacking out and taking everybody's ransom. So you have to get your bow out. You have to have that there. And that means you, especially at a Herreshoff, unlike a 420 or an Opti where you can accelerate quickly, you have to be moving with speed. And if you're not moving with speed, at that point, you will get rolled and then you will be buried. And now you're fighting for 10th.
I asked this question in the round table that we did, and the answers were a little varied, but how long, by your estimation, do you think it takes to get to full speed at a close hauled course in a 12?
I don't know. 15, 20 seconds. It depends. I mean, if it's blowing, 20 knots from the southwest, not much. If it's 8 knots from the north, more. It just depends. I mean, that's the great thing is big breeze equalizes a whole lot of mistakes because you can get yourself up to speed, and no matter what boat you're in, much quicker than you can if it's blowing 7 or 8 knots and things like that. And that's the great thing about the Herreshoff. It's built for big breeze. So if you get the 15 knots or 18 knots in Buzzards Bay and big chop, like it likes that. So put the bow down, get the boat moving, and that keeps it gives you more options, as it were.
Are there other things that are unique to the 12 that affect your upwind strategy? You did mention that, oftentimes you would wait, be sure that you had a clear lane before you tacked because clear air and tacks are very slow. Um, did you ever find that the 12 is a boat that was forgiving as far as having different modes? Did you ever sail upwind specifically in a high mode or maybe in a low mode to get over the top of other boats? Or is it a pretty narrow mode and you're just always VMG max speed upwind?
Yeah, no, there's some grooves in different places. The windier it is, the more you can feather the boat, the more you can sort of lift up under above people. The lighter the breeze, the more I like to sort of put the bow down and just drive. But again, you run into, it depends on where you are. You run into some situations where you're gonna be forced to tack at some point. If you're sailing at Buzzards and it's the southwest and you start at the pin, you run into that shore of whatever that other neck is pretty quick, and then you've got to
Scraggy neck.
tack. Yeah, and if you wait for everybody else to tack, now you're coming back on their hip, which means when they tack to the mark, you're gonna have to make a decision: do they overshoot and you can tack under them, or do you have to duck them and give that boat up? So there's a little bit of winning the pin at Buzzards is not necessarily the best choice unless you can push yourself out quick enough to make everybody else tack before you get to the shore. Which is ironic because get correct me if I'm wrong, that's where you want to be. You want to be on the shore and get that little lift around
It
that.
is true. Yeah, there's a geographic lift, so you want to be over there, but it's usually where the start line is. If you're the first boat off the pin, you sail into a hole before you get to that lift. So, as far as boat speed going upwind or just staying in your groove, you talked a lot about sort of set it and forget it, but I'm assuming especially in medium breeze and up, are you playing with the main sheet? Are the jib and the peak, everything's pretty set? Are you playing with the main sheet at all? Or is your crew, if you've got a good crew, are they playing with the jib sheet at all? Or is everything pretty locked in?
Nope, I lock the jib sheet in, lock the main sheet in, and then I'm going to adjust by feathering or bearing off. I'm just going to keep that I got telltales on my jib. I'm watching those telltales, and I'm keeping them flying, and I'm constantly adjusting the boat to keep them flying. Downwind, off the wind, I'm gonna set the main for where I think it's going to be most of the time, and then I'm going to get that spinnaker up and let that big sail draw as much as I can. And even on the reaches with a spinnaker up, I'm gonna do that as much as I can. I'm gonna drop the peak some, to keep the sail full as possible, but not, and sometimes even on a reach on the jib, I'll just leave the jib strapped in. It really doesn't. The jib on a Herreshoff really only tacks the boat. It doesn't. I don't find it contributes much beyond that. You can't tack a Herreshoff without it, which is sort of shocking to me. But from terms of an engine driving the sail, the spinnaker and the main do majority of the work. And so if I'm spending time worrying about that, then I'm not focused on the other things. And so I like to just keep it as simple as possible.
Great. Okay. Moving on to something that we got a handful of questions about in advance of this. The U.S. sailing rules are changing going into 2025.
Yeah.
Are there any changes that jump out at you that would be relevant to our fleet?
Um, yeah, the two main changes are with 17 and 18.3. So 17 is the sailing above proper course um, rule. And so the big change there actually comes in more into match racing and in team racing than it does in fleet racing. But in team racing, if a boat's going to come in and slam dunk on you, the defense used to be you come up as they come in, and then you can sort of block them from completing their tack. You can't really do that anymore because as they cross head to wind, the question is where is your overlap with them? So it's a big game changer in what I'm doing with the high school kids and the college group. But it's maybe less of a game changer for us. So in the talk we had with Dave Perry earlier this year, he just suggested if you're the windward boat and you're crossing a port tacker and you're going to tack on top of them, maybe you give it an extra half boat length before you do that, to keep yourself well clear of where that leeward boat is. And then 18.3 is the one where your starboard tacker's fetching a mark to round into port, and the leeward boat tacks inside the zone and how that affects it a little bit. And I don't have that in front of me right now, but I do know there's a little bit of a change in there. If you're in Edgartown on July, I think it's 7th or 8th, you can come to the Edgartown Rules Seminar being given by yours truly, and I'll have a full explanation for it
Great.
at that point.
Good.
Another
Um,
shameless plug for other things I do.
Well, I want to open it up just in case anybody has other questions. Feel free to write there. But my last question for you was just, you've been in high level coaching and racing as you continue your sailing career after racing so much with the H class. What kept you coming back to the 12, even though you had gotten into some pretty high level coaching and racing? What's special about these boats? Why do you love them?
It's the people. It's all of you guys who are, again, spending a Tuesday night with me for an hour. It's the groups you see, year in and year out, your friends you have who you basically see once a year at the nationals, and that's all you see them. It's the group you sail with at your local club. It's a fun group of people to sail with. And unlike a lot of classes where you can spend a lot of money and buy a lot of things and try to make your boat go faster, it's really about the people sailing it, and it's not an arms race to get the boat going and being successful. So that's, I think, the part that I like about it. As I said, I think the 2012 Nationals was the last one I sailed. Ellen and I went down to Shelter Island. We had a borrowed boat. It did not go well. I'd like to blame the boat, but I know a good carpenter doesn't blame the tools, so it was most likely me. And we haven't Wendy hasn't been on the water, I think, since 2010. But she's coming back this year. my brother decided to keep my dad's old mooring in Quistit, so we need a boat to put on it, and that's going to be the boat. And she's leaving Salt Works probably next month and going to Quistit Harbor Boatyard, and it's going to for the first time be unwrapped for a while and shined up. And I don't know if I'll make it up to Buzzards to sail. We've got a family wedding this summer, but I'd like to think at some point I might get over there and get in the boat. But that's the tough part. And now that I live on Mid Cape, you can't. Like, there's no place to put the boat where I am. And you drive to Marion or Beverly or Buzzards or Beverly or to Quistit. It's an hour, and I'm not sure that's a good use of my time in the middle of the summer. But um, you know, not getting rid of the boat, not yet, at least.
Great to hear. I mean, it's a legendary boat, and hopefully she gets out for some Quistit races, and we will hold a mooring for you at Buzzards anytime. So we're ready for you.
Yeah,
Should you want to come, and hopefully you can make it to the dinner, even if you don't come. It's being hosted by the Wares again this year, as it has been for many times
yeah.
in the past. So just on behalf of the H class, would love to thank you again for this. Like I said, this is going to live um, on the H class YouTube page for a long time, so it'll get a lot more views from a lot more people. But I wanted to also thank the currently 43, but we had well over 50 people here for a while, which is pretty exciting, given this is a 110 plus year old class at this point. Um, Last thing I just want to say to everybody on here is that the H Class Championship is being held at the Buzzards this year. It's the last weekend of July. We will have a junior championship, and if you have a boat that you wouldn't normally lend to juniors, but you would like to sail perhaps with your child, we're going to allow that this year. So the juniors will be held on Friday. We're going to have the NOR posted by May 1st, and registration will go up then. So look to your email and hope to see all of you at the Buzzards. We've got boats, we've got moorings, and we've got people willing to house you. So hope to see lots of friendly faces there this summer. Again, thanks again, and see you guys later. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.